1. I grew up in a small town in Washington State, located on the Puget Sound. If you are familiar with that area, then you know about the large ferries that transport commuters and their vehicles across the water to spare them from idling away on the dreaded I-5 traffic. I rode the ferry every school day for 3 years since I attended high school on an island outside my district. I've always loved learning, and so I chose to commute rather than attend my local 4 kids to a locker monstrosity. On most days, I was surrounded by other commuting children and familiar adults, since we followed a fairly predictable schedule and caught the same boat every day. However, one day early in my junior year, I felt sick enough that I needed to go home early in the afternoon. As I was walking down the car ramp to board the ferry on its lower deck, I suddenly had an urgent feeling that I was in danger, that I was being watched. My gaze whipped up to one of the viewing platforms on the passenger level, and made eye contact with a trim, middle-aged man who was leaning casually on the rail of the viewing platform. When his eyes met mine, he held the contact and smiled very slowly. As a 5'2", 17-year-old girl who looked alarmingly young for her age, when I was 22, I was still mistaken for being 14. I had learned to recognize a predatory gaze when I saw one, but something about this was different. Every sense I had was on hyper alert as I rushed up the stairs to the platform. I just had to know where this person was so that I could avoid them at all costs. There was no way I was going to be caught unawares by this creep, or so I thought. As I rounded the corner out of the stairwell, I immediately turned towards where I thought he would be, still on the viewing platform, except he wasn't. Just then I heard a smooth male voice from behind me. "Hi there." I spun around and there he was, not 2 feet away, smiling his slow smile, hands resting casually in the pockets of his trousers. The guy looked like he was trying to pose for GQ. "How are you doing today?" he asked. Innocent enough question, I mumbled that I was doing okay, and went to sit in a very quickly calculated seat. This booth was the closest to the stairwell, and had the added benefit of allowing me to sit with my back to a wall. I hadn't liked being approached from behind one bit. I also didn't like how it almost seemed as though he purposefully moved from the platform for the sole purpose of making contact at the top of the stairs. That was unnerving. Nonplussed, the man strolls a couple booths down, and introduces himself to a surprised man who was already seated there. If this wasn't strange enough, he sits down in the booth, not across, but next to this apparent stranger, so he is now seated 2 booths away and facing me. He proceeds to tell this polite but perplexed stranger that he is successful, yada yada, a pilot, yada yada, wealthy. You get the picture. I am assuming that this conversation is entirely for my benefit, and try my best to keep an eye on and ignore him at the same time. Finally, in what seemed like an age, but was more like 20 minutes, the boat pulls into the dock and prepares to unload. I start to slowly dig around in my bag, trying to look busy, hoping that he will leave first. The stairwell is narrow, long, and cut in half by a heavy metal door. I don't want to be in there with him. The minutes tick by and the man is still engaged in his little tete-a-tete, so I decide to make a move. I zip my bag shut and make for the stairs. To my dismay, the man breaks off his conversation mid-sentence and jumps up to follow me. Now I can be pretty quick on my feet, but I'm not quick enough to run through a metal door unscathed. There was no choice but to stop and try to wrench the damn thing open as fast as I could. Before my hand could leave the handle, he was there, much too close. His hand fastened around my arm to stop my descent. He was breathing hard. "I'm heading to town. You need a lift." His words came out, rushed through his still smiling teeth. I told him I didn't need a ride. Again he offered, adding that it would be no trouble, but he was in a hurry now. He should already have been in his car and ready to go at this point. I jerked my arm away and told him that my dad was picking me up and was waiting. I don't exactly remember what happened at that point, except I was able to get away from him and leave the ferry unharmed. Because I was not at all certain that a parent was actually waiting for me with their car, my dad was still at work, and my mom was habitually late. I hid inside the ferry terminal building until all the cars had offloaded and driven away. I walked up to the pickup point where my mom, to my great relief, was waiting. and that was that. I didn't call the cops. I don't really remember having a conversation with my mom, though I assume I did tell her. But I still remember that smiley, smooth, scary man from that day. Sometimes I wonder what he planned on doing. Sometimes I wonder if he did it to anyone else. Creepy pilot on the ferry. Let's not meet again. 2. So a few months ago, I went out with my boyfriend to the clubs and bars in the downtown area of our small college town. There was not much to do around here, so during the weeknights this area was packed with bodies. One particular night, we went to one of our favorite dance clubs that only played throwback music. And not coincidentally, it was a lot of people's favorite. So the entire room that was the club was tightly packed to the point there was no personal space unless you were along the outer edges. Mind you, I was already pretty drunk from pre-gaming, so I just clung to my boyfriend as he pushed through the crowds towards the back, where we would have at least a little bit of room to ourselves. Once we reach, I have the worst realization. My phone isn't in my pocket. I started to freak out, so my boyfriend also starts to panic, until we realize we have a way to track my phone. He opened up Find My Friends on his iPhone to see where my phone was, and lo and behold, it is still somewhere in the club. Now I have no idea how I would be able to find it in such a mess of people. Not to mention I did not have my glasses on, and was blind as a bat without them. So the best thing I could do was stand in one place and wait as my boyfriend stalked off, while calling my phone and hope someone would pick it up and return it to us. As I waited, I realized the crowd was pushing against me. I decided to make my way closer to the bar, as there were stools and a little more legroom. As I got close, I decided to wait right near the edge so my boyfriend would still be able to find me easily when he returned. As I was preoccupied with worry, I felt someone tap my shoulder. I was jumpy and shifty-eyed from being inebriated, so I'm sure I was looking like some lonesome, vulnerable 5-foot girl when I stared wide-eyed at a man that did not fit this place's demographic at all. He was moving slowly but purposefully, so I could tell he was not drunk when he grabbed my arm roughly. The man was much taller than I was and about 15 years older, so warning bells in my head went off. But I was so out of it that I barely cared about what was happening, because regardless, we were surrounded by people everywhere. There is no way he could get away with anything, was my thought process. Surely enough, the grab was intended to seat me on a stool at the bar. It was a very swift gesture. I barely realized I had been dragged. He stood beside me and leaned in. "What would you like to drink? How about a vodka?" I remember just staring back at him and making no gesture whatsoever. He took my silence for a yes as he beckoned a bartender over to order a vodka Sprite. Feeling uncomfortable, I swiveled in my chair to just look out and around at all the college-aged boys and girls, which only made me sitting next to this grown man feel even more uneasy. When I looked back towards the bar, I saw that he already had a drink in hand, and was just backing his head and hand away from the cup. Immediately, I felt like something was off, that if I continued to sit here and even if I did nothing, this was going nowhere safe. He saw me look and smiled as if he did not just make the motions of putting something in my drink. "Here you go, sweetheart," he says, sliding the drink over to me. I noped the hell out of the seat and said, "Sorry, I'll see you later." Thinking back now, he did not even deserve anything from me, much less an apology. But I was drunk and already disoriented from the situation, and missing my phone. As I walked the 1-foot gap between the bar and dance floor, I ran straight into my boyfriend. He was walking back and had found my phone. I was just so relieved to be out of both the stressful situations that I decided not to mention the encounter with the creepy bloke. Around 10 minutes later, a friend of my boyfriend's shows up, and we all grab seats at the bar. I sat on the outer edge while my boyfriend sat in the middle, and his friend sat in the seat closest to the wall, while my boyfriend's back was turned to me as he was discussing something with his friend. I looked over my shoulder, out into the dance crowd, when I saw the man again. He caught eyes with me and smiled slowly, then walked his way closer and closer to the bar. I started to breathe rapidly and feel frightened when I realized it once again looked like I was alone and vulnerable. He lifted up his index finger and curled it slowly, making the motion like, "Come here." It was actually the creepiest thing I have ever seen. I quickly tapped my boyfriend's arm. He is 6'3" and 200 pounds. He is a big dude and much scarier than little old me, and got him to put his arm around me while I stared back at the man, who only continued to smile. My boyfriend finally turned to look at what I was, and only then did the man just back away into the crowd and vanished among the population. I felt a bit shaken but much safer now that he was away. But the fact he wanted to somehow convince me a second time to follow him, for whatever purpose, is absolutely terrifying. The next day when I was sober, and recounted the story to my friends, I truly realized how much danger I really was in. So bar creeper who tried to drug me, let's never meet again. 3. This is a story about an old neighbor of mine. Me and my husband and 2 young kids moved into an old fixer-upper house back in the summer of 2015. I was in college full-time, and my husband agreed to stay home with the kids until I graduated, and we would slowly work on doing the house up, etc. Anyway, it was situated in a very small, sleepy village in the countryside in Ireland. Everyone knew each other and everyone knew your business. We had a neighbor called Johnny. He was a loner. The only living family members he had was a brother named Thomas, and had no friends. He was an ex-alcoholic, but I still had the strong suspicion he drank heavily most nights. He was a clean freak. Well, the outside was immaculate. His grass was the greenest, softest grass I ever saw, and nobody could touch it, or he would come outside yelling at you to get off his property. He had expensive garden statues, and it was like a lawn out of a fancy magazine. But inside his house was dark and filthy. The floor tiles were black with dirt, and his ceiling was yellow from smoking cigarettes indoors and never opening windows. His appearance was always unkempt, and he had bulging eyeballs, and had a demeanor of someone about to explode with rage. The day we moved in, he walked into our front garden and introduced himself in a rough way. "I'm Johnny. I live next door. I've been living here 66 years, 8 months, and 21 days. Who are you two?" Me and my husband thought he was a weirdo from the get-go, but were polite, and explained we just bought the house and planned to make it our family home. Then he said nobody should ever have bought that house, that it was his late sister's house who died many years ago when she was a young woman. We were taken aback by this, but said sorry to hear, etc. He then turned and walked away, but stopped abruptly at the gate, and said in a rage-filled voice, "I cut the grass every second day at 10 a.m. I take care of this lawn and mine. Don't ever touch the grass." Okay, sure, we said, not really thinking he was going to be serious about this. Now we live here. I'm sure he will just let us cut our own grass, etc. And we laughed it off. Turns out he was very serious. Every morning at 10 a.m. we would hear his lawnmower start up. And there he was, cutting the grass whilst muttering angrily and looking around wild-eyed. My husband went outside and told him, "Hey, it's okay, I'll do it." But Johnny would continue as if he couldn't see him. Johnny was also a hunter. He had 2 dogs he would bring with him, and he also owned a hunting shotgun. This freaked me out, as guns are rarely seen in Ireland, especially to be in the hands of someone so unstable. Then the really strange stuff happened. We were clearing out the attic upstairs. We had all the trash to dump in the front garden, and Johnny storms into our garden yelling, "What are we doing?" He marched into the hallway and said to never ever go near the attic. My husband got annoyed at this point and told him to leave us alone. It's our house and we'll do what we want. Johnny freaked out, screaming his dead sister's clothes are up there, and all her belongings, even her old-fashioned bicycle, and to never touch them as they're not ours. Needless to say, we ignored him and put the stuff outside, and told him if he wants them that much to take them into his own house. He stormed off and looked back at us, laughing maniacally. He freaked me out, but my husband said he's just some weirdo, and to not take notice of him. The next day, the rubbish removal company were due to come collect the stuff we decided to dump. We were surprised to see that the pile of old belongings was untouched all day. The following day arrived, and when we awoke, all the belongings were gone. No surprise as to who took them. 2 days later, we didn't hear his lawnmower. We didn't so much as see him for 3 whole weeks. Then one day, while my husband was out of town, I was alone with the kids, and they wanted to go outside to play soccer. We went, but discovered all of their soccer balls had kitchen knives stuck in them. Needless to say, I got freaked out and called my husband, who said call the police, but I didn't think there was anything they could do. That night I barely slept. I lay awake, terrified Johnny was behind all this. The next morning I went downstairs early, and there Johnny stood in his backyard at around 5 a.m. It was still dark outside, and it was raining. But there was Johnny, yelling, "Don't touch your clothes, Tommy. I'll kill you, Thomas. I'll kill you. Don't look at me like that, with your sinful stare." Again, I was pretty unnerved and felt like I shouldn't be seeing this. So I tried my hardest not to listen as I went to the living room. Later that day, I heard Johnny start up his lawnmower as I was in the backyard with my best friend, who decided to come and visit for the day. Johnny saw us both in the backyard and stopped in his tracks. "You didn't tell me you had a sister." "Oh no," I said. "She's not my sister. She's my best friend." Then Johnny yelled, "You can't fool me. Wait until I tell Thomas what you tried to do. He won't be happy." Then he stopped yelling and stared right at us with his bulging eyes. And in a very eerie, calm voice said, "It's clear you're sisters. You have the same flesh." And he walked away muttering angrily. We were both really freaked out at this point, and my husband was due home soon. We decided to both walk to a nearby store to buy milk, and as we did, a neighbor from across the street approached us. She explained that Johnny was a shady character, and the house we bought was in fact his late sister's house. But she hadn't just died all those years ago. She had been murdered in a very brutal fashion. She mentioned nobody had ever been brought to justice, as it was so long ago and nobody was ever a suspect in such a small village. Everyone except Johnny. She said nobody trusted him, but apparently he was questioned by the police and released without charge. I mentioned his brother Thomas, and she looked bewildered and said Johnny has no living family, and he never had any brothers at all. I was totally freaked out by this information, and hurriedly rang my husband to tell him. He agreed Johnny was dangerous, possibly mentally unstable, due to some undiagnosed mental issue like schizophrenia or something. But he made him uneasy, especially as we had young kids. The next couple of weeks involved Johnny yelling at Thomas some more and smashing plates on the floor every night, screaming, "Eat your dinner, Thomas, for God's sake, man! I'm cooking it all day. How dare you refuse?" My husband said we would just ignore him and he might stop. My husband also bought his own lawnmower to take care of the grass. One morning he was just setting it up when out of the corner of his eye he saw Johnny staring at him through an upper-story window. He could hear him muttering angrily but couldn't make out what he was saying. That night, things escalated. The kids had a sleepover in their friend's house, so we decided to paint inside and do some light renovation work. That night, there was a series of long, hard, angry knocks on the door. It was Johnny yelling, and spit flying from his mouth. In his hands was his shotgun, clutched so tight his knuckles turned white. "I told you! I warned you! Not to touch the grass!" As he said the last words, he kicked the front door down. He stood in our hallway, reeking of alcohol and cigarette smoke. I genuinely thought we were both going to get shot. My husband tried to talk to him, but it was no use. He was getting angrier and angrier, until he just abruptly stopped, stared straight ahead, looking past us, and said, "I need you to bring me home. I don't feel well." I protested, but my husband said call the police, so I did. They took it very serious, seeing as there was a gun-wielding maniac in my hallway only moments ago, and now my husband had agreed to walk him just as far as his front door, not leaving my sight as I stayed on the phone to the police. As Johnny opened his front door, my husband said he caught a glimpse of the hallway. The walls were covered with yellowing newspaper clippings of the death of his sister. Hundreds of them. He even had crude drawings my husband couldn't make out. My husband literally ran and jumped the wall dividing our homes. When he'd done that, he walked on the grass. Johnny came out with his gun aimed right at him, and just as he did, 2 police cars showed up. Their timing was remarkable. Johnny had to be tased twice, but was eventually overpowered. All the time yelling, "He didn't kill her, he didn't kill her," his sister. The court case is still pending, so I changed his name for obvious reasons. He's being investigated for his sister's death, and there's now breakthroughs with DNA. And he's still aggressive and manic in jail apparently. Keeps saying Thomas will die without him to look after Thomas. His house now lays empty and unloved. The once manicured lawns now are overgrown and wild. It has a creepy feel about the place. And the newspaper clippings still remain on his hallway wall. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 310. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, as I record this, it's Friday, technically, 6 in the morning. I should probably be heading to bed soon, and I'll likely spend the most of Friday when I wake up making videos. But that's fine, it should give me the weekend off. Since it's Comic-Con this weekend, and I can't go to San Diego Comic-Con, and quite frankly, I wouldn't want to actually go. Too busy, too many people for my liking. I will, however, be perusing YouTube, trying to find panels for my favourite TV shows and actors and whatnot, and hoping to find all sorts of this is a good thing if you're a bit of a geek or nerd. This is a good weekend because lots of little tidbits and trailers will come out about upcoming projects, films, TV shows, comics, obviously, and whatever else. So I'll be looking forward to that. And I'll probably still be trying to find stuff come Monday when you guys hear this. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.